All right, here we are talking about descriptive details, sensory imagery today. We are in week 3 of our class and we're working on our memoir. You'll be submitting the memoir for a grade in lesson 10. So we talked a lot the last 2 weeks about how to build that memoir, how to generate ideas for that memoir, and then how to make it relate to your reader through characterization, etc. So what we're going to talk about today, our objective is to build the narrative using descriptive details and dialogue. So in our session today, we're going to talk about descriptive details and their importance, but we're also going to talk about how to construct dialogue, and we'll get to the dialogue piece later. But today, right now, we're going to talk about descriptive details. And we've kind of reviewed this a little bit in the past couple sessions. Descriptive details basically is when we are using language to transport the reader to the story. When we read a story and we are gripped immediately and pulled into it and we can't put that book down, it's because it transports us. It takes us on a trip to a different location. That happened because the author uses descriptive details, descriptive imagery, the 5 senses, etc., to show and not tell us the story. We can see it. For me, when I read, and I don't know about you, but when I read, it's almost like a movie playing out in my head. I see all the details that they describe. It might not look exactly the way they envisioned it, but it's the way I interpret the details they give me, and that's what I love about narrative writing. So with our memoirs, I encourage you and I challenge you to try to do that too. So let's look at that how. With the 5 senses. The see, the hear, the smell, the touch, and the taste. If you think about your memories, and what triggers your memories, for me, it's like if I walk into a room and I smell mashed potatoes or baked potatoes, I guess more specifically, I am immediately transported to this house I used to go to when I was little because the mom made baked potatoes every Sunday afternoon. And it was like just the smell of baking potatoes makes me go there. So smell is a very, very powerful sense. Taste, again, can draw us back to a time, remember when I had that incredible chocolate ice cream that tastes just like that. So it transports us as individuals, so it will definitely help transport your reader as well. So let's take a look at this sentence that's listed right here. The car lands awkwardly, causing it to roll. It's not a great sentence because even though we get an idea of what's happening, we don't really know what's happening. What does awkwardly look like? What does this word awkwardly even mean? If somebody lands awkwardly, what does that look like? What does it mean? When it rolled, did it roll sideways? Did it roll front over end? Did it land on its side? And then the car. Is the car driving itself? Is there a person in the car? Like, what's going on here? We don't learn anything from this sentence about this story. But if we say, like Jeffrey, while driving home from choir practice, hit the guardrail on the highway, causing his car to spin wildly in circles, tires screeching on the pavement. So think about what you would be adding to this to increase the details. I have tire screeching, which is noise. The car spinning wildly in circles before it drives down the embankment, smacking trees along the way. Before coming to an abrupt end in a shallow, water-filled ditch. Looks like that part that's off the screen there. Okay, so Jeffrey, while driving home from choir practice, hit the guardrail on the highway, causing his car to spin wildly in circles, tires screeching on the pavement before it drives down the embankment, smacking tree limbs along the way, before coming to an abrupt end in the shallow, water-filled ditch. Now, obviously, it's a little bit of a run-on. I'd have to do some serious revision here before I would submit this as part of my project for a grade. But I at least have the the idea of smacking, screeching, spinning. I have the imagery of water filling a ditch. I have the ditch is shallow, so there's more descriptive details there. So I maybe didn't touch on all 5 senses, but I hit on a few of them to bring more life to my details, or to my story and the details that I am providing. So think about that when you are writing your essay today, or your memoir today, about how you can highlight the story to show more of what's happening. And we're going to talk more about that after you fill out the next couple questions. We'll talk more about that with dialogue shortly. Okay, so now what I would like you to do, now that we've gone over what sensory imagery is and how to show and not tell, your task is to go into your memoir that you're writing for Unit 3 and to find one of the sentences that you think doesn't do a very good job of being descriptive. I want you to use that sentence from your memoir. I want you to put to task the techniques we just talked about. Utilize those techniques and expand your sentence using sensory imagery so that you show and that you don't tell. And then you can use this sentence or sentences, if you choose to do more than one, in your memoir. Now, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and complete this task. You're going to come into, when you take the quiz at the end, you're going to have the opportunity to share that sentence with me. There you go. I could not find that word in my brain. You're going to have the opportunity to share your revision with me in the quiz. All right, so go ahead and pause the video. Oh, but before I do, I'm going to give you the first 2 letters in your access code. The first letter is B. The first letter is B as in boy. B as in boy. All right, go ahead and complete that task for me. We'll see you in a few minutes. On to part 2 of this async activity. Let's talk about dialogue. Dialogue is super important. We obviously talk to people every day, but dialogue, when we talk about it in terms of narrative, it's a conversation with 2 or more people in a book or a play. And the purpose of dialogue is it allows your characters to interact, it moves the plot forward, and it provides valuable characterization activity for your reader. What I mean by that is, if you remember back to a previous lesson, characterization can be built upon character interaction. How are characters nice to each other or mean to each other? Are they snarky with each other? Are they rude to each other? Are they happy to see each other? It allows your reader to infer more about your character using dialogue. And it allows you to take some of those plot points and move them forward. Instead of having to explain everything, you can do a lot of that using dialogue. So dialogue is super important, and I encourage you to use it at least 2 times in your memoir if you can. You'll find that you have a lot more fluency in your story if you do incorporate some dialogue. But there are rules to how to write the dialogue that makes it easier for your reader, which is me, to read. So let's take a look at those rules. Number 1, punctuation is inside the quotations. When I talk to students about this, they are in awe. They're like, really? I've always put it outside the quotations. And we'll go over that more specifically in a minute. But yes, you want to make sure that your punctuation is inside the quotation marks. Second, start a new paragraph with each new speaker. You say, why, Mrs. Sandine? Why must we do that? The reason behind that is it will make it much easier for your reader to understand who is speaking if you start a new paragraph with each new speaker. It also will add organizational fluency to your writing, and it will make it easier for you to keep track of your dialogue. So, main purpose, however, is to make sure that your reader understands who's speaking. So let's take a look at my example. My example is, good morning, Karen. Well, good morning, Robbie. How are you? Replied Karen. Just peachy, Karen. What are you doing? Karen looked down at her knitting, then back up to Robbie. Why, knitting, of course. Isn't it obvious? Okay, so here with my example, I wanted to have 2 characters interact. I've got Robbie and I've got Karen. And Karen, a little snarky there, a little sarcastic when she says, why, knitting, of course. Isn't it obvious? So I'm able to convey a little bit of Karen's personality without even having to describe her. You as the reader are going to be like, well, that was kind of rude. But if we're talking about the rules of punctuation here, first of all, as you'll note, I have started a new paragraph with each new speaker, right? So the paragraph is new for each new speaker. So I have, good morning, Karen. look where the quotation mark is and where your punctuation is. Your end mark punctuation, oops, I drew that right on top. Your end mark punctuation is right here at the end of the sentence, and your quotation mark is here. So please note that the period is inside the quotation mark. Well, good morning, Robbie. How are you doing? Replied Karen. So I would like you to note one thing right here. This is a question that she is asking Robbie. So it is a question mark that is inside the quotation mark. But since this isn't the end of our sentence here, if she had said something that wasn't a question here, we would be putting a comma instead of a end mark. If that makes any sense. So for example, I'll show you down here. Okay, so I added a little bit so I can show you that example. In the second sentence here, that Robbie says, just peachy, Karen. What are you doing? You look busy. So this is an end of Robbie's sentence of what he's saying to Karen, but instead of putting a period there, because I still have this in my sentence, I put a comma. So the only time you won't put a comma when you still have your end of the sentence here is when it's an exclamation or a question. This last one, Karen looked down at her knitting, then back up to Robbie. And just because this is introducing what she's about to say, I'm also going to put a comma before this quotation mark. And then at the end of my sentence, I'm going to put my end quotation and my question mark inside the quotation. Hopefully that wasn't super confusing. Dialogue, it's really a lot more straightforward once you write it a couple times. So I encourage you to keep this slide up. Try to mimic the style of the dialogue, mimic the punctuation. Make sure it's always inside the quotation. That being said, if you start to write dialogue for your narrative and you are stuck and aren't sure what to do, then give me a call. I'd be happy to walk you through it, okay? All right, happy dialoguing. Okay, guess what? Now you get to write dialogue. So I want you to go to your memoir. I want you to identify a place in your memoir or your narrative where you can add dialogue. I want you to write the dialogue out using the correct format reviewed in the video for this scene in your memoir narrative. So go back, identify where you can put some dialogue, and then write it out using the correct format that I just reviewed in the video right before this one. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video here and complete that task, then you will submit your new dialogue in your quiz. The next two letters in your, next two letters in your answer, or your access code, are I and G. I and G. So you're going to put the first one you heard together with those two, and you're all set to go. Let me know if you have questions.